Welcome to Healing Wisdom, a Thursday morning talk show featuring guests sharing their stories and knowledge. We discuss the healing aspects of the arts, metaphysics, social justice, and adventure through all types of terrain. So join me, Pandora Peoples, here on WOMR 92.1 FM in Provincetown and WFMR 91.3 FM in Orleans. We're streaming worldwide at WOMR.org. Today we speak with violinist Audrey Wright and journalist John Carlos Frey. Audrey Wright will be performing Luminous Being at the Atwood Museum in Chatham today at 6:30 as part of the Atwood Summer Series. Tickets are available at atwoodmuseum.org or chathamhistoricalsociety.org. Violinist and Cape Cod native Audrey Wright is a member of the New York Philharmonic and concert master of the Baltimore Chamber Orchestra. A multifaceted artist across solo chamber, music, orchestral, and pedagogical realms, Wright has previously served as associate concertmaster of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra and held positions with the Excelsa Quartet, New World Symphony, and Verbier Festival Chamber Orchestra. With a passion for innovating programming that juxtaposes a wide range of musical styles, her debut album Things in Pairs with pianist Yundu Wang was released on Navona Records in 2022. She has also soloed with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, the Baltimore Chamber Orchestra, New World Symphony, and Cape Cod Symphony, and has worked closely with many leading musicians of our time. Welcome, Audrey. Tell us about your inspiration for Luminous Being.
I would love to tell you about our inspiration for Luminous Being. So Luminous Being is a brand new program as a collaboration between myself and my husband, Jeff Robertson, who is an artist, and kind of labor of love and a project that we've been working on for a couple of years now. And essentially, it is an exploration into the kind of magical connections between music, light, and technology. What it entails is a solo violin performance that I've curated to include music spanning 9 centuries, as well as some of my own original compositions and arrangements. And this is accompanied by light art created by Jeff. And the main component of this is a piece of wearable light art, so a garment that is outfitted with lots of lights that move in different patterns and with different colors that are responsive to the music that I am performing. So it's kind of this multisensory experience. And the concept of this is basically to distill elements of sound and light and theater and costuming all into kind of one condensed, very intimate and very unique performance for solo violin. So the connection between light and sound, I think, is incredibly fascinating just in general, especially if you're working in close contact with an artist who works with light. You start to think about the ways in which these two art forms merge and meet and converse. So the way that we think about light and sound together for Luminous Being is that, of course, there's this live performance element. So I am creating the sound, the music, and the light that is on me, because I am wearing this garment made of light, responds in 2 ways to that sound. So one is kind of an automatic response to the frequencies of the sound, to the kind of rhythmic impulses of the sound. And so it triggers, there's like an actual microphone built into the garment itself. And so it's kind of triggered by the music that I'm playing in real time. And then there's a second component to that, which is there are also patterns and colors that we have decided on as a duo that Jeff will be kind of manipulating and triggering himself during the performance, during the live performance. So there's a lot of kind of hands-on collaboration happening, even though, I am the musical performer. It's kind of a holistic experience of us working within these two art forms. It evokes so many images. It evokes so many feelings of color, of darkness, of light. And I think vice versa, when you are watching lights, there might be something that comes to mind. There's a rhythm, there's a pulsation that feels very musical. Yeah, so the original compositions that I will be performing on this program have really kind of pushed my boundaries and horizons as a classical musician. And the kind of impetus for writing this music has been this project specifically, in order to kind of curate a program that feels very genuine, and that we're not just plugging in a random classical program to go with some lights. I really wanted to curate something very specific to converse with these lights. So I'm using a lot of live looping techniques. So I use a looping pedal, some effects pedals as well. So I'm using an acoustic instrument, but lightly amped with some of these extra electronic techniques. And that is all incredibly new and different for me. But it's exciting because I think it's really opened up my own sense of creativity, and it's pushed that for me to kind of listen to the sound worms and the sound bites that inevitably make their way through my brain, and to kind of explore them and write them down and then perform them. So there's a mix of that kind of completely original music that I've written, as well as some arrangements of pieces that already exist, but not for solo violin. So I've arranged them for solo violin. And I think they really just kind of help round out the whole program. So thank you for asking about my love of Baroque music. There's something that I think is really freeing and gets back to the kind of natural state of playing the violin when playing Baroque music. First of all, because the music itself is written with the kind of bass line in mind. So that means that harmonically we're really tied to this natural progression of harmonic form. And so it feels very organic and natural. I've experimented a lot with playing on kind of historical setups. So like with a violin that is strung with gut strings, also with a bow that is in the shape of what would have been used in Baroque times in the 1600s, 1700s. So just understanding the kind of original equipment, if you will, for playing that music, it has inspired me to have, I think, a more natural approach, again, to playing it with my modern equipment. And so it's a lot of fun to play. So on this Luminous Being program, I'll be playing some music by Johann Sebastian Bach. And so that's kind of early 1700s. Also, I will be playing an arrangement of a 12th century piece. Now, this is very much pre-Baroque. This is medieval music, but I think just in general, what I love about curating programs is picking music from very different time periods and finding the connection between those pieces because those connections are there. Being, you will hear music of the Baroque era, you'll hear music of the medieval era, you'll hear music from the 21st century, and it all follows this really cohesive arc that somehow works visually too. I play a Guadagnini. The story behind the Guadagnini is that I started playing on it when I was in the Baltimore Symphony, and I'm now with the New York Philharmonic since 2022. But I've been fortunate enough to continue playing on this Guadagnini. It is on loan from the Marin Alsop Family Trust, and Marin Alsop was the music director of Baltimore Symphony for about 14 years. And so that is how I got acquainted with her and that instrument, and she's generously loaned it to me since then. So that's the story of that instrument. And I will just say the instrument I will be playing Luminous Being on is actually a different instrument. And it's the one that I own personally. And it's a 2004 Maryland Wallin, made right here in the U.S. And so it's a modern instrument, but I was its very first owner. I remember when we acquired it as a family, you know, my parents and I, it was kind of a family affair of finding this instrument and knowing that I needed a new instrument at that time. I was in high school at the time, falling in love with it, just the physicality of it and the sound of it. It really fit my personality. So I am actually playing on that instrument for this program, and so happy to have the chance to play that a little bit more because I've been playing the Guadagnini more regularly for the past few years.
And can you talk briefly about the differences between playing an antique violin and one where you're its first owner?
So the difference between playing an antique violin and a modern one, I think it's a really great question. It comes a little bit down to, well, it comes mostly down to how the instrument has kind of aged, and, you know, like a fine wine, older string instruments do age as long as they've been maintained properly. They age really well so that they continue to develop a deeper, warmer, richer sound over time. So I think that's kind of like an inherent quality in older instruments. Certainly the Guadagnini that I do play on has this beautiful, deep, rich tone. Some people say, oh my gosh, it sounds like you're playing a viola, which has lower strings than a violin. And I take it as a total compliment because I love that kind of richness of sound. And in contrast, modern violins tend to be a little bit brighter. And of course, if you're playing an instrument for the very first time as the first owner, you may go through a period where the instrument has fluctuations in its tone quality. You might have to get it adjusted more often just because, you know, it's made of wood, and wood is and was a living thing. So of course, it's going to kind of fluctuate, especially in its earlier life. But I would say also for my modern instrument, the Wallin, that instrument has aged so well since 2004, and also has a rich tone that I'm very grateful for, because I think sometimes it's harder to find that richness in modern instruments. So there are definitely differences in kind of their tone and personality, but both of them fit my personality really well. So I've been really lucky to be paired with instruments for which that is the case.
Thank you so much, Audrey Wright. Folks can get tickets to your concert tonight at chathamhistoricalsociety.org. Welcome back, journalist and filmmaker John Carlos Frey. You work for the Marshal Project, a nonpartisan, nonprofit news organization that seeks to create and sustain a sense of urgency about the U.S. criminal system. So I would love for you to speak on your work investigating the lethal heat in prisons.
Yeah, the heinous thing about the U.S. prison system, this specifically what you're talking about, is the Texas state prison system. But for the most part, generally speaking, we are the largest jailers of people in the world. By percentage, we jail more people than anybody else. There are more people in our prisons. And the majority of the people in the prisons are people of color or poor people, people who can't hire a lawyer, people who can't sort of, work the system and get out. They're stuck. And they're stuck with whatever is given to them. They can't complain about the food. They're going to be there for a long time. They can't complain about the conditions. And the conditions in many states, and Texas specifically, are punishment states. They're not there to rehabilitate, to learn a skill, to get back out and assimilate into society and not reoffend. The rate of recidivism in our jails is horrific. Most people reoffend. And Texas is way at the bottom. Texas is the largest prisoner in the country. And their state prisons do not have air conditioning at all. Many of the state prisons have their own farms. They grow their own produce. They raise their own livestock. The pigs in Texas state prisons have air conditioning in the barns and in the pens, but the prisoners do not. So every summer, which is brutally hot in Texas, the prisoners have to wet their cement floors in their prison cells and cover themselves in wet rags and get fans to blow on them. This is a daily occurrence for months on end. And many of them, especially the elderly and the sick, will die. And that's a part of it. You talk to anybody in the prison system, governor to somebody who's elected as prison warden, they'll all say, well, they shouldn't be in there in the first place. And that's their punishment. So, that's what you get. There's no humane treatment of these individuals. So we did do a report on what it's like to be inside a Texas prison.
And also, and lastly, I'd love for you to speak to the drought affecting migration from Central America.
Well, if you know anything about what's going on now, we hear that the border is being overwhelmed and that people are coming in larger numbers than they ever have, but nobody's talking about the why. And Central America and a little bit north and a little bit south of Central America, mostly agricultural communities. They're fairly poor communities, and they rely on seasons. They grow their crops, they sell their crops. That's how they live. They live off the land, and they live off what they produce, and they live off what they can sell extra. It pays for farm equipment, it pays for school, it pays for, it's basically the economy. So when that fails, when the rains don't come, or the summers are longer and hotter and drier, which is what is happening now, and those crops fail, the entire economy fails. So there's no way to get a job. There aren't any jobs. So people are coming. Climate migration is what it's called. They are moving away from these dry areas. It's called the dry corridor in Central America. It's a drought that's been going on for over 8 years. So they're leaving their homes, they're leaving their farmland, they're selling their cattle, they're selling their equipment, because they've got nothing else left to do, and they're coming north and they're coming to the United States to look for a job. So the vast majority of people who are at our borders now looking for help are coming because of climate change.
And one of the things that was in the article that you wrote, I believe, was that right now they have to stay on the Mexican side of the border. Is that?
That's the law. That is the law. And you have to present yourself to a customs agent, and you have to wait in a line. The line can be 3 months long. So they come hungry, they come homeless, they're living on the streets in Mexico, waiting their turn in line to present themselves to a customs agent, a border patrol agent, to try and make a plea for asylum to see if they can get into the United States. And that process is lengthy. The president of the United States, Joe Biden, to look tough on the border, has made it even tougher for these people to come in. So they're waiting in longer and longer lines. And these are families mostly, mothers with their children, and a lot of them are subjected to crime in Mexico because they're basically living in flop houses and on the street anywhere that they can.
I think a lot of the ideas about who Mexicans are, part of it is being Catholic and part of it is being very family oriented. Like, I think it's very threatening, the community orientedness of it. And even like the reverence for, the Madonna or the Virgin of Guadalupe. Like, I think that for some people can be triggering, but also they're Mayan, right? A lot of folks have indigenous blood. And so I kind of see there being like a connection between how, in the US, we treat Native American people, indigenous people.
I mean, they are other. For the most part, we bring them here. They wouldn't be here or come here if there wasn't a job. A large portion of agriculture that is still farmed by hand, that things that have to be picked by hand, are picked by people from Latin America. A large portion of them are Mexican. So, for us to have some kind of a discriminatory look at them, I don't think we would get our produce picked if it wasn't for them. They don't speak our language. As you say, they're indigenous. They look different, so they seem to be a threat. But if you're in California, it's a little different because we're used to them. They've been here for a long, long time, and California was a part of Mexico. So that's not. But I'm sure if you're in Georgia or South Carolina or even further along the eastern seaboard, they look threatening, and they've been maligned and they've been marginalized and dehumanized. So, we point our finger at them as if they're the bad people, as the gangbangers or the people who are going to rob you or rape you. And that's the way they're portrayed. We have a big push, I would say, by both parties, both Republican and Democrat, to seal the border, to get rid of them, to deport them. This is a criminal element. When, for the most part, as you say, they're God-fearing, family-oriented, hard-working people. But we're not allowed to look at them that way. We're not given that opportunity. And the media certainly doesn't help by chance of build that wall or, pointing our finger south of the border.
Well, thank you so much, John Carlos Frey, for joining us today.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Today we welcome educator and historian Elaine Weintraub, author of Lighting the Trail, African American Heritage of Martha's Vineyard. Elaine created the Martha's Vineyard African American Heritage Trail, which now has 37 sites. The tour incorporates history from slavery to the Underground Railroad, from abolition through the Civil Rights Movement and beyond. Welcome. In honor of Juneteenth, can you talk about slavery on Martha's Vineyard?
Well, the evidence is quite strong that it existed. Of course, enslaved people don't leave a trail of information behind them, unlike free people who you can find evidence of their lives. So enslaved people tend to turn up in court documents or wills. And that was an area of research that I did an awful lot of reading, wills in the probate department in Edgartown. I think that the point of it was that, of course, enslavement existed here. Why wouldn't it? It existed all over America. Was the situation more complex here? Probably, because it was a small community, a maritime community. Nancy Michael, for example, was held, and the verdict given in the court case about her said that she was held and used as a slave, contrary to the laws of the Commonwealth. So that's pretty clear. But also, I think what we've realized with the work is that enslaved people weren't just enslaved victims. They were people. And enslaved here, yes, there was a racial hierarchy, all of that. But they were people, and they had a role to play. And that's been the fascinating part of the research that I've done. From Nancy, who was the wise woman who cursed the sailors, to Rebecca, the woman from Africa who inherited property for her lifetime, which was an anomaly of Massachusetts law. And recently somebody sent me a document from Hartford, Connecticut, that talked about how somebody was trying to rescue an enslaved person. And they gave her to this, apparently this woman who swore and then said she would take her to Martha's Vineyard. She'd be all right there. Yes, there was enslavement. Yes, there were rescues. Fugitives from enslavement were more than likely helped by Native Americans, which would make sense when you think Chappaquiddick Island. That would be a place, Aquina. So yes, it existed, but there's so much that we have to unravel. That abolitionists, for example, were not all white men. They were people from the Native community, from the African American community. So the situation and the story is complicated.
Tell us about Esther.
I found the story 15 years ago tucked in the corner of some place, and I thought I have to come back to this old document. But Esther was found in 1700s when slavery was still legal in Massachusetts. And she had, as usual, it's very hard to find any definitive information. But she had escaped from a boat that had put in the harbor of Edgartown. She was supposed to be being transported back to North Carolina and to enslavement. The best information I managed to find was a deposition at the first mate on the boat that was holding her as a prisoner. And he claimed that they put a crowbar over her feet, they tied her hands behind her back, they placed her in the hold in the bottom of the ship, and when they woke up in the morning, she was gone. And that was their story, and they were sticking to it. Now, whether there's so many interpretations, maybe they did do all that, in which case they can't have been around because somebody did rescue her. She was gone. And they said she was gone and the longboat was gone with her. But, she didn't take a longboat and go off to Canada. That's not reasonable. I would imagine what she did was go to Chappaquiddick and hide out there. And so when we rescued her from obscurity and decided to put her on the trail, the National Network for Freedom, the federal government, we really liked the story, and they said, we will have that. So that site is on the National Network to Freedom and has federal recognition. But it's incomplete in that we don't know. We don't know where she went. But we do know she didn't take a longboat from the boat and sail off to Canada. We do know that.
You've been listening to Healing Wisdom at Outermost Radio. All of our shows are podcasts at WOMR.org. Also check out healingwisdomradioshow.com and contact me at pandora@WOMR.org.